The silk of her gown felt like a lie against Brielle's skin. It was a borrowed confidence, a deep sapphire sheath that cost more than her last 3 rent payments combined. From her vantage point near a marble column, the ballroom of the National Museum of Art was a glittering galaxy of old money and new power. Every laugh sounded like the chime of a cash register, every clinking glass a transaction. And somewhere in that constellation of predators was him.
Park Min-yoon.
Her ex. The reason for the dress, the gala, and the man who was currently 5 minutes late. Brielle smoothed a hand over her hip, the expensive fabric doing little to soothe the frantic beat of her heart. $200. That was the price she'd put on her pride, wired through a discreet online service that promised handsome, articulate dates for any occasion. The profile she'd chosen had been sparse but effective. A single, well-lit headshot of a man with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to hold a quiet gravity. No name, just a client number. Client 7. She just needed him to be tall, to wear a tuxedo well, to hold her hand and laugh at her jokes, and look at her in a way that would make Min-joon's polished veneer crack right down the middle. She needed to survive one night without the pitying looks, the whispers that followed her like ghosts whenever Min-joon entered a room. That's when she felt it. A shift in the air behind her. A subtle drop in temperature, a stillness that cut through the ambient chatter. Brielle? The voice was low, a deep velvet hum that vibrated through the floor. She turned. It was him. Client 7. The photograph hadn't done him justice. In person, the quiet gravity in his eyes was a physical force. He was carved from shadows and discipline, his tuxedo tailored with a precision that suggested it was a second skin. He wasn't just wearing it. He was inhabiting it. A faint, clean scent of cedarwood and something like cold night air clung to him. You're here, she managed, her carefully rehearsed greeting evaporating on her tongue. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. His gaze swept over her, not with the leering appraisal she was used to, but with a swift, analytical assessment. It was unnerving. You gave me a time and a place. I am here.
Right.
Of course, she took a breath, trying to reclaim the script. Okay, so, the rules are simple. My ex is here. His name is Park Min-joon. He's an arrogant piece of work whose father owns half of Gangnam. He'll probably try to talk to us. Your job is to look, well, like you're doing right now. Look at me like I'm the only person in the room. Laugh if I make a bad joke. Your name for tonight is Daniel. Daniel Kim. You're a visiting investment analyst from New York. He watched her, his expression unreadable. One dark eyebrow arched a fraction of a millimeter. Daniel Kim, he said the name as if tasting it for poison. Investment analyst. Is that a problem? No, the word was absolute. He extended a hand, not to shake hers, but palm up an invitation. Shall we? When she placed her hand in his, a jolt went through her. His skin was cool, his grip firm and certain. He didn't just hold her hand. He claimed it, his thumb stroking a slow, possessive circle over her knuckles. It felt nothing like a business transaction. He moved them into the crowd, and it was like parting the sea. People just made way. He moved like the room owed him space. They found Min-joon holding court near the champagne fountain. He was exactly as she remembered, impeccably dressed, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, his eyes scanning the room for his next victim. When his gaze landed on Brielle, it was filled with a familiar, dismissive contempt. Then he saw her hand in the stranger's, and his smirk faltered. He approached them, his movements slick and predatory.
Brielle.
I'm surprised to see you here. I didn't think this was your kind of scene. His eyes flicked to the man beside her, dripping with disdain. And who is this? Did you finally find someone desperate enough? Brielle's spine stiffened. The old shame, hot and sharp, pricked at her. But before she could utter a single word of her practiced, witty retort, her date stepped slightly in front of her. It was a subtle, protective gesture. My name is Kwon Jin-woo, he said, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that silenced the area around them. He hadn't used the fake name. He hadn't followed the script.
Min-yoon blinked, confused.
I don't know you. Jin-woo's lips curved into something that wasn't a smile. It was a warning. You know your father. You know the debts he carries. Tell him the man from the Han River sends his regards. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper only Minjun could hear. And if you ever speak to her again, the next regard I send will be delivered to your mother at your funeral. The color drained from Minjun's face. The arrogance, the cruelty, it all dissolved into pure, primal fear. He stared at Jinwoo, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, before he turned and practically fled, melting back into the crowd. Brielle stared, her heart hammering against her ribs. That wasn't an act. The cold, lethal promise in Jinwoo's eyes was real. This man was not an investment analyst named Daniel. $200 didn't buy that kind of terror. Before she could process it, the grand double doors of the ballroom burst open. Men in dark, tactical gear swept in, their movements surgical and silent. Panic erupted. Screams echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The glittering galaxy imploded into chaos. Jinwoo's hand tightened on hers. His body became a shield, his calm a stark anomaly in the screaming pandemonium. His eyes weren't panicked. They were calculating, scanning the room, assessing the threat. He wasn't a victim of the chaos. He was a part of it. "What's happening?" she cried out over the noise. He didn't look at her. His focus was absolute. A business dispute. He pulled her behind the marble column, his arm a band of steel around her waist. "They are not here for me, but they have seen you with me." He finally met her gaze, and the polite mask of Daniel was gone. What looked back at her was a predator. "Stay with me if you want to live." He didn't wait for an answer. As the first gunshot cracked through the air, he pulled her into the shadows, and Brielle's world shattered. The silk dress was no longer a lie. It was a shroud for the woman she used to be. The escape was a blur of controlled violence. Jinwoo moved through the panicked crowd and armed assailants with a chilling grace, one hand always gripping hers. He didn't run. He flowed, using the chaos as camouflage. He led her through a service corridor, down a concrete stairwell, and into the sterile silence of the museum's underground garage. The air was cold, smelling of gasoline and damp concrete. He stopped beside a black sedan that was so polished it looked wet. It was an island of perfect order in the disarray of the attack. He opened the passenger door for her, his movements economical and precise. "Get in," he commanded. It wasn't a request. Her mind was still reeling, trying to catch up.
Who are you?
What was that with Minjun? The Han River, what does that mean? His jaw tightened. It means his father made a promise he couldn't keep. The men upstairs are the consequence. He looked at her, and for a fleeting second, something like regret flickered in his dark eyes. "You were not meant to be a part of this."
But you're now.
"Get in the car, Brielle." He said her name differently than anyone else had. It wasn't soft. It was definite, like an ownership claim. She got in. The drive was silent and fast. The city lights of Seoul blurred into streaks of neon and gold. He drove with an unnerving focus, his hands steady on the wheel. She watched his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyes constantly scanned the mirrors. This was his world. Violence and threats were his native language. They arrived at a residential skyscraper that pierced the clouds. The penthouse was a testament to minimalist wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking panorama of the city. The furniture was sparse, expensive, and cold. There were no photographs, no personal trinkets, no sign that a human being actually lived here. It was a beautiful, sterile cage. "You will stay here," he said, shrugging off his tuxedo jacket and tossing it onto a black leather sofa. "My men are securing the perimeter. No one will get in." "Stay here? For how long?" "I have a job. A life." "Your life, the one you knew an hour ago, is over." The words were brutal in their honesty. "The men who attacked the gala are from the Viper clan. They are my rivals. They saw you with me. In their eyes, you are my property. A liability. A target." Brielle sank onto the sofa, the borrowed sapphire dress feeling absurd in this stark, dangerous reality. "This is because of you. I hired you for $200 to be a fake boyfriend." A humorless smile touched his lips. "The agency you used is one of my fronts. A way to gain access to places my face would be recognized. I was at that gala to observe Minjun's father. You were an unexpected complication." A convenient cover. So you used me. Yes, he said, without apology. And now I have to protect you. Days bled into a week. Brielle was a prisoner in a gilded cage. Jinwoo was a ghost, coming and going at odd hours, always dressed in immaculate dark suits, his presence filling the vast apartment with a silent, simmering tension. He provided her with clothes, food, books, anything she asked for, except her freedom. One evening, she couldn't stand the silence anymore. She found him in his study, a room dominated by a single, massive oak desk. He was staring at a small, framed photograph. As she drew closer, she saw it was of a smiling woman with bright, laughing eyes, her arm linked with a younger, softer version of Jinwoo. Who was she? Brielle asked softly. His shoulders tensed. He didn't turn around. Her name was Haein, his voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet the pain was a palpable thing in the room. She was my fiancée. Silence stretched between them, thick with things unsaid. She was killed, he finally continued, his voice a low rasp. 5 years ago, the Vipers. They saw her as my weakness, a lever to use against me. They cornered her in a parking garage. I was 10 minutes too late. He finally turned to face Brielle, and his eyes were hollowed-out voids of grief and guilt. I failed to protect her. I buried my heart with her that day. I will not make that mistake again. That was the moment everything changed. His possessiveness, his cold control. It wasn't just about protecting a witness. It was about exorcising a ghost. He wasn't protecting her from the Vipers. He was protecting himself from the agony of failing again. He was trying to rewrite the past with her as the protagonist. The next day, the threat escalated. One of Jinwoo's men brought him a tablet, his face grim. On the screen was a grainy security image from the museum's employee entrance. It was a photo of Brielle, taken weeks ago. The Vipers had identified her. They knew who she was beyond just the woman on his arm. That night, Jinwoo came to her. He placed a passport and a plane ticket on the coffee table. A new identity, a flight to Zurich. A car will be waiting. From there, you will be on your own. It is a risk. They may be watching the airports, but it is your only chance to have a life back. She stared at the documents. Freedom, an escape from this violent world. She could take it, run, and spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder.
Or she could stay.
Here, in the heart of the storm, with the monster who started it all. She looked up at him, at the man who carried so much death and grief within him. She saw the flicker of vulnerability he tried so hard to conceal. He was offering her an escape, but his eyes were begging her to stay. Running felt like a betrayal, not just of him, but of the woman she was becoming. They're hunting me because I was with you, she said, her voice steady. Running just makes me pray. Staying makes me part of the fight. She pushed the passport back across the table. I'm not Haein. I'm not your ghost. But I'm not a coward either.
I am staying.
A strange light entered his eyes. Relief, respect, and something else, something dangerously close to possession. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. He stood so near she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the ever-present scent of cedar and cold air. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was a physical caress. Haein was like a cherry blossom, he murmured, his voice impossibly soft. Beautiful, delicate, and easily crushed. He looked down at her, his gaze intense enough to burn. You are carved from obsidian. They can try to break you, but you will only become sharper. Their eyes met, and in the charged silence a new, unspoken contract was forged. It wasn't about protection anymore.
It was about partnership. A dangereux, deadly alliance.
She had made her choice. The enemy's next move was insidious. A message was delivered not to Jinwoo, but to her. It appeared on a burner phone left on her nightstand. A simple text from an unknown number. We know about Park Min-jun.
We know what he did to you.
Give us Kwon Jinwoo, and we will give you justice. Your ex will disappear. No one will ever find the body. The Vipers weren't just trying to kill Jinwoo. They were trying to poison her, to use the wounds of her past as a weapon against her future. She deleted the message without a second thought, but the venom of the offer lingered. They saw her as a pawn, a jilted woman hungry for revenge. They had no idea who they were dealing with. A few days later, the war came to them. Jinwoo had to meet an informant, a low-level viper looking to defect. The meeting was set for a public place, the crowded Gwangjang market, to minimize the risk. Jinwoo insisted Brielle stay behind, but she refused. You need a second pair of eyes, she argued. Someone they won't be looking for. Reluctantly, he agreed. He placed her in a small tea shop on the second floor of a building overlooking the designated meeting spot. He handed her a pair of powerful binoculars and a small earpiece. You see anything out of place, you say one word. Run, then you get out of there. Do you understand? She nodded, her heart a frantic drum. From her perch, she watched him move through the bustling market below. He looked like any other businessman, but she could see the coiled tension in his shoulders, the constant, subtle scan of his surroundings. He met the informant near a stall selling glistening silks. They exchanged a few words. Brielle scanned the crowd, her eyes darting everywhere. Then she saw it. A man selling dried squid, his face half hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't watching the customers. He was watching Jinwoo. And in his hand, tucked beneath a bundle of squid, was the unmistakable shape of a gun. Before she could speak, she saw another. A woman pretending to shop for vegetables, her hand already inside her purse. An ambush. There was no time to say run. They were too close. Her mind raced. She looked around the tea shop, desperate. Her eyes landed on the fire alarm box on the wall. Without a second thought, she stood up, walked over, and pulled the lever. A deafening alarm blared through the building. People screamed, scrambling for the exits. Down in the market, the sudden chaos was the perfect diversion. Every head turned towards the source of the noise. In that split second of distraction, Jinwoo moved. He shoved the informant to the ground and disarmed the man with a squid in a blur of motion. The woman with the purse never even got her weapon out before one of Jinwoo's own men, disguised as a shopper, had a knife to her throat. Brielle had saved his life. Back in the sterile safety of the penthouse, the adrenaline still sang in her veins. They had one of the assassins, the man from the squid stall, tied to a chair in the center of the living room. Jinwoo's face was a mask of cold fury. "Leave the room, Brielle," he ordered, his voice dangerously low. She looked at the terrified man in the chair, then back at Jinwoo. The junior archivist who cataloged historical documents would have run. But she wasn't that person anymore.
No.
His eyes narrowed. "This will not be pleasant." "I'm not pleasant," she replied, crossing her arms. "I'm the woman they're trying to kill. I've earned the right to see this." He stared at her for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. What followed was a masterclass in psychological and physical intimidation. Jinwoo never raised his voice. He was methodical, precise, his questions like a surgeon's scalpel, stripping away the man's defiance layer by layer until he was a sobbing, broken mess, spilling every secret the vipers held. Brielle watched it all. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She absorbed the brutality of his world, and in doing so, she crossed a line she could never uncross. She was no longer an innocent dragged into danger. She was a willing participant. Later, after his men had taken the assassin away, Jinwoo stood at the vast window, staring out at the city lights. He was washing his hands with a cloth, a meticulous, repetitive motion. She approached him from behind, the silence in the room heavy with the violence that had just occurred. "I should be afraid of you," she whispered, the admission tasting like metal on her tongue. He stopped, his back still to her. "I am afraid of you," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. He turned, his eyes darker than the night sky outside. They were filled with a raw, startling vulnerability. "For 5 years, my world has been shades of gray. Revenge, loyalty, debt. It was all cold calculation. Then you walked into that ballroom," he took a step closer. "You make me feel. It is the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to me." It was more intimate than a kiss, more binding than a vow. It was a confession of a shared weakness, a shared danger. The vipers, enraged by the failed ambush and the loss of their man, made their final, most personal move. A courier delivered a package to her old supervisor at the museum. Inside was a box. And inside the box was a sapphire blue silk dress, identical to the one Heian had been wearing in the photograph on Jinwoo's desk. Tucked into the folds was a single, perfect white gardenia, Heian's favorite flower. There was no note. None was needed. The message was clear. We took her from him. We will take you too. The final confrontation was inevitable. The Vipers, through a terrified Park Min-jun, proposed a truce. A meeting. The head of their clan, a man known only as the Serpent, would meet Jinwoo face to face. The location was a historic tea house in Insadong, a place meant to signify neutrality and tradition. It's a trap, Jinwoo stated, looking at the details on a screen. I know, Brielle said, looking over his shoulder. Her eyes widened. The Goryeo tea house. I know that place. Her mind, the archivist's mind, clicked into place. The museum helped them with a restoration project last year. I spent weeks there, cataloging their antique ceramics collection. I know the building's layout. Every storeroom, every staff corridor, every hidden exit. She looked at him, her gaze resolute. You're not going alone. I'm your tactical advantage. The tea house was an oasis of tranquility, all polished wood and paper screens. The air smelled of old cedar and brewing green tea. The Serpent was an older man with eyes like chips of ice. The tension was a living entity in the private room where they met. Pleasantries were exchanged, thin veils over the murderous intent beneath. As predicted, the trap was sprung. The paper screen slid back, not revealing serene gardens, but a dozen men armed with silenced pistols. In the ensuing chaos, Jinwoo was a whirlwind of lethal motion, but they were outnumbered. As two men moved to flank them from a side corridor, Brielle acted. She grabbed Jinwoo's arm. This way.
Now.
She pulled him not towards the main exit, but into a narrow, dark hallway she knew led to the kitchens. It was a path his enemies would never anticipate. As they ran, she saw a priceless celadone vase displayed on a pedestal. Without hesitating, she shoved it. It crashed to the floor with a sound like shattering history. The noise drew the attention of two of their pursuers, the guards who had been flanking them. The diversion gave Jinwoo the opening he needed. Two silenced shots echoed in the hallway, and the threat was neutralized. She didn't fight with a gun. She fought with her mind, with the knowledge she had carefully curated in a life she could never return to. She led him through the labyrinthine back passages of the tea house and out a small, unmarked door into a quiet alleyway, leaving the sounds of the failed ambush behind them. In the back of the waiting sedan as it sped away, the city lights a frantic blur. The silence was thick with the aftermath. Adrenaline still coursed through her, sharp and electric. He turned to her, his face cast in the shifting shadows of the streetlights. His eyes were full of a raw, unguarded emotion she had never seen before. Heian was my past, he said, his voice low and rough. She was the ghost I tried to save, the failure I could never outrun. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. His touch was a brand. But you are the woman who fought beside me. You are my present. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. The world she had known, her small apartment, her quiet job at the museum, the woman who thought $200 could solve her problems, was gone forever, burned away in the fire of his world. A cost had been paid. Her old life for this new one. As for Min-jun, his family's empire was systematically and silently dismantled by Jinwoo's organization in the following weeks, a cold and absolute punishment for his role in the chaos. He wasn't killed. He was erased. Later that night, they stood before the vast window of the penthouse. The glittering sprawl of Seoul lay beneath them like a carpet of captured stars. She wore a simple black silk robe that felt more like her own skin than the borrowed gown ever had. He came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her back against the solid warmth of his chest. His chin rested on her shoulder, his breath warm against her ear. He didn't say the three simple words that belonged in a different, softer world. He said something far more true. They will never hunt you again. His voice was a low promise, a vow sealed in blood and violence. They will know that to touch you is to declare war on my entire empire. They will know you are mine. She leaned back into his embrace, her body relaxing into his. She was not his captive. She was his queen. Brielle looked at their reflection in the dark glass, two silhouettes against the endless city lights. She didn't see the woman who had once tried to rent a moment of confidence. She saw the woman who had walked into the dragon's den and set it ablaze, claiming the fearsome beast for herself. It wasn't a happily ever after. It was something far more potent. It was a beginning.